Canada is so large you could fit 18 Francis inside it and still have room left over. This is the country that invented insulin and IMAX theaters. It spans 6 time zones and holds natural resources valued in the trillions of dollars. Its economy ranks among the G7 leading global powers. The second largest country on Earth by area, yet one of the most sparsely populated. Only about 40 million people live here, while most of the territory remains wilderness. Forests, mountains, endless tundra, and 60% of all the world's lakes. For the last 15 years, Canada's economy was the envy of many developed nations. Canada ranks 4th in the world for oil reserves and exports over 4 million barrels daily. Its agricultural products feed people across the planet. It survived the 2008 financial crisis better than any other developed country. Its impressive GDP was always stable, and thanks to progressive policies, Canada was considered worldwide as one of the most prosperous, free, and livable countries. But then this happened. On November 25, 2024, President-elect Donald Trump threatened to impose 25% tariffs on all Canadian goods. Trump accused Canada of allowing massive quantities of drugs and illegal migrants across its border into the United States. But the president's particular displeasure was triggered by the trade deficit between the countries, which now exceeds $100 billion. The Wall Street Journal noted the threat shocked Canadian politicians and business leaders. After all, roughly 3/4 of all Canadian exports go to the United States. And Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau flat out stated that such measures would destroy the Canadian economy. To which Trump responded, then perhaps Canada should become the 51st state of the United States. Many took it as a joke. But over the following months, the situation began escalating. The Canadian government categorically ruled out joining the United States, and Trudeau's Liberal Party threatened retaliatory measures if tariffs were imposed. At the same time, Canada began fortifying its borders. On February 1, 2025, Donald Trump signed an order imposing 25% tariffs on goods from Canada, then called the country non-viable on his social network, and again suggested considering joining the United States. The joke, repeated several times now, stopped being funny. So how did Canada end up in a situation where it can be publicly humiliated and pressured into joining the United States? A country once known for rich resources and high living standards now faces serious difficulties. In 2023, the economy dropped from 6th to 16th place in productivity. Today, even the poorest American states produce more than all of Canada. Yet Canadians work more hours than people in other countries. Hold on. Before we dive into this research, I need to know something. Where are you joining from, and what time is it there right now? Country, city, local time? Put it all in the comments below. I really want to see how global this is. Now, let's get into it. Let's rewind to understand how we got here. October 19th, 2015. Election night in Canada. A record number of Canadians, tired of the old government, turned out to vote for change. Justin Trudeau became the new Prime Minister. Thanks to his progressive views, he won trust and promised to fulfill the Canadian dream, usher the country into a golden age of development, and make life more affordable for everyone. People chanted Trudeau's name. They took photos with him, admired him, and hoped for swift change. But public love faded quickly. Over the past 10 years, Trudeau became one of the most hated figures in Canada. Here's why. Since 2015, more than $1 trillion has fled Canada. The main reasons are high taxes, bureaucracy, and lack of investment incentives, making business operations extremely difficult. Canada became an extraordinarily expensive country. To buy a house in Canada today, the average family must earn $170,000 per year. In Vancouver, That figure rises to $360,000, while the median family income is only $70,000 per year. Buying a home in Canada is practically impossible, which is why 67% of Canadians don't own property. That's why most prefer to rent. But rental availability severely lags demand. Across the country, rental vacancy rates hit a record low of 1.5%. People fight to find a place. Every apartment application faces hundreds of competing applications. Landlords just keep raising rent. They understand renters have no choice. Today, renting a one-bedroom apartment in Toronto or Vancouver costs $3,000. After paying all taxes and rent, Canadians barely have enough money to make ends meet. The average professional here earns around $3,500 per month. People eat less, work multiple jobs, and some even live in their cars. As of 2024, Canada ranks third in the world for household debt to GDP ratio. In Ontario alone, there are 80,000 homeless people as of 2024. That's 25% more than in 2022. One reason for housing unaffordability is Justin Trudeau's immigration policy. Since 2016, the Canadian government has admitted approximately 3 million migrants. In the third quarter of 2023 alone, there were over 400,000 immigrants, including both permanent and temporary residents. This was the largest influx since 1957, when the country accepted thousands of refugees fleeing the Hungarian Revolution. Population increased dramatically in a short period, while the government squeezed an already undersupplied housing market. This is simple economics. Increasing demand without increasing supply drives prices up. Declining productivity is another serious problem. Many production facilities sit idle, and companies prefer hoarding cash instead of investing in development. High corporate taxes, harsh regulation, and bureaucracy force companies to relocate operations to other countries with more favorable conditions. This leads to job cuts and declining tax revenues. Canada's situation shows how even the strongest economy can become vulnerable due to dependence on one partner. Money flows out of the country to the United States. After World War II, economic ties between Canada and the United States strengthened. This began with the signing of the Auto Pact in 1965, a trade agreement that allowed free movement of automobiles and auto parts between countries. The pact became a key factor in developing Canada's automotive industry, making it an integral part of the North American supply chain. In 1988, the Canada-United States Free Trade Agreement was signed. 5 years later, it expanded into NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, including Mexico. This agreement opened new opportunities for exporting Canadian goods to the United States, especially in sectors like energy, agriculture, and consumer goods manufacturing. Canada began supplying oil, gas, timber, wheat, and numerous other resources, ensuring stable access to America's enormous market. However, everything has a downside. Any changes in United States policy strongly affect Canada. For example, the energy sector, agriculture, and automobile manufacturing, key sectors of the Canadian economy, are highly sensitive to American tariffs and regulations. What's happening between the United States and Canada today already happened in 2018. Back then, Donald Trump also imposed tariffs on steel, 25%, and aluminum, 10%, citing national security threats. Canada, the largest steel supplier to the United States, got hit too. For Canadians, this was shocking. How could a country, ally, and partner threaten security? Canada responded with mirror measures, imposing tariffs on American goods like whiskey, ketchup, and even yachts. Disputes led to negotiations, and in 2019, both sides agreed to cancel tariffs. But consequences remained. Business lost billions of dollars, and trust between neighbors weakened. The United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, signed in 2020, replaced NAFTA. For Canada, this was a difficult compromise. The agreement strengthened requirements for the automotive industry and added stricter rules regarding dairy products. The United States gained access to 3.6% of Canada's dairy market, whereas under NAFTA, the figure was 3.25%. Canadian dairy farmers were forced to reduce production due to market share loss. Canada signed the agreement to avoid something worse, a trade war. However, the deal didn't eliminate all disagreements. The United States continues imposing temporary tariffs on Canadian lumber and other goods, using its economic leverage. So what exactly are these trade wars? They're a type of conflict between countries without using weapons, but applying economic restrictions. For example, banning import and export of certain products, sanctions, quotas, barriers for companies so they can't operate freely. This raises a logical question. Why can't Canada simply diversify its markets? The answer lies in geography and economics. The nearest alternative market is the European Union. But transportation costs and logistics significantly reduce competitiveness of Canadian goods. For example, oil from Alberta province is exported almost entirely to the United States because Canada lacks sufficient infrastructure to massively export it to, say, Asia. There aren't enough ports and pipelines. Speaking of Asia, that's another promising market, especially China. But political tensions make relations with Beijing inconsistent. Moreover, entering that market means competing with countries like Australia and Brazil, which offer the same resources but are located closer to China. Australia already supplies China with coal, gas, and metals. Brazil supplies soybeans and iron ore. That's why United States sanctions could prove catastrophic for the Canadian economy. First, the United States is the main consumer of Canadian exports. If Americans impose sanctions or restrictions, this will lead to significant reduction in goods, especially in key sectors like energy, agriculture, and automobile manufacturing. This will trigger a chain reaction: declining company profits, mass layoffs, falling living standards. Second, sanctions can hit investments. The United States is one of Canada's largest investors. Restricting financial flows will slow economic growth and cut innovative projects. Third, Canada depends on American technologies and equipment. Restricting access to these resources will significantly complicate development of strategically important sectors like information technology and medical technologies. And finally, the banking system itself. Canada is integrated into the United States financial system. Sanctions against Canadian banks or companies would block access to American markets, credit, and investment. So why hasn't Canada, despite its enormous advantages, become a global superpower? There are reasons. Today, Canada's population is over 40 million people, making its domestic market relatively small. By comparison, the United States has over 340 million people. A limited market reduces opportunities for scaling large companies domestically. Moreover, a significant portion of the population is concentrated in a few major cities, like Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver, making internal demand even narrower. This forces Canadian companies to focus on exports, making the country's economy dependent on external markets. Yes, Canada has vast natural resources. As of 2024, about 14% of the country's GDP comes from extractive industries. However, dependence on raw material exports makes the economy vulnerable to fluctuations in world prices. In 2024, oil prices stabilized at $80 to $85 per barrel. But during periods of collapse, for example in 2020 during the pandemic, Canada's GDP seriously suffered. Moreover, raw materials are exported as semi-finished products, and value added is created outside Canada, limiting its economic competitiveness. Productivity of Canadian companies is lower than competitors from the United States and some European countries. This is due to insufficient investment in innovation, research, and development. According to the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, Canada spends about 1.7% of its GDP on research and development, significantly less than South Korea at 4.8% or Germany at 3.1%. Additionally, vast territory and low population density increase transportation and logistics costs, also reducing competitiveness. And as we already understand, Canada is closely tied to the United States, which is its largest trading partner. More than 75% of Canadian exports go to the United States. Geopolitically, Canada also relies on the United States for defense through alliances like NATO and the North American Aerospace Defense Command. In 2024, Canada increased defense spending to 1.6% of GDP, but remains dependent on American defense systems, especially in the Arctic region. It's hard to believe that Canada, fixed in people's minds as a prosperous, powerful nation, has become synonymous with economic failure. In January 2025, the Bank of Canada revised economic growth forecasts for coming years. Growth in 2025 is expected to be 1.8%, lower than the previous forecast of 2.1%. The main reason for revision is the impact of government policies aimed at curbing population growth. Food prices in the country rose 10% since 2022, resulting in over 2 million people visiting Canadian food banks in March 2023, a record figure double that of 2019. Basic goods like eggs, meat, and vegetables now cost twice as much as in the United States. For example, a liter of milk can reach $2.50, and a loaf of bread $3 to $4. Businesses, investors, and entrepreneurs are leaving the country due to inability to operate normally. And one of the main reasons why living and doing business in Canada became difficult is taxes. Federal, provincial, income taxes, taxes on goods and services, property taxes. It seems the government takes a cut of everything. And one of the biggest nightmares for all Canadians is the carbon tax, which has made gas and heating costs higher than ever. Canadians spend more on gas than any other G7 country. The carbon tax sparked waves of resistance from citizens and politicians. Liberal members opposed the carbon tax only when voter complaints surged. But it still hasn't been cancelled, although discussions have been ongoing for a long time. Canada's once free healthcare system was considered among the best in the world. But now wait times to see specialists can take months or even years. The system is overloaded due to lack of funding, shortage of medical personnel, and population growth. Many Canadians now choose private clinics or even travel to the United States for treatment, despite enormous costs. The government categorically rejects the possibility of Canada joining the United States, and Trudeau, following Trump, imposes retaliatory 25% tariffs on goods from the States, such as alcohol and fruits. In total, goods worth $107 billion will fall under restrictions. However, public opinion polls show that some Canadians view the idea of joining the United States more positively. According to a survey by independent firm Ipsos conducted in January 2025, 30% of Canadian citizens are ready to support joining the United States if Washington guarantees them American citizenship and conversion of savings into dollars. In the age group from 18 to 34, this figure rises to 43%. At the same time, United States residents don't show much enthusiasm about Canada joining. According to a U.S. trade group poll, only 25% of Americans support the idea, while 49% oppose it. The majority, 77%, believe unification is only possible with Canada's voluntary consent. Against the backdrop of everything happening, Canada lacks stable government. Justin Trudeau announced his resignation in early January 2025, citing internal party disagreements and the need for leadership renewal. In a recent speech, Pierre Poilievre, leader of the opposition Conservative Party, said the following: "Canada needs a strong plan. We need to approve resource projects, cut taxes on labor, investment, energy, housing construction, and domestic manufacturing. Eliminate trade barriers within Canada so we can trade among ourselves. Stop giving energy to Americans at undervalued prices. And strengthen borders and the military." Here's what this entire story reveals. 3 clear conclusions emerge. First, economic dependence on a single partner is a fatal vulnerability. Canada built its modern prosperity on seamless access to the United States market. 75% of exports flowing to one destination created efficiency and wealth, but also created fragility. When that one partner decides terms are no longer acceptable, the dependent economy has no leverage. Canada can't simply pivot to Europe or Asia. Geography, infrastructure, and existing supply chains lock it into North American integration. The lesson is universal. Diversification isn't just good practice, it's survival insurance. Countries that concentrate trade, investment, and financial flows with one partner sacrifice strategic autonomy for short-term gains. When the relationship sours, they're left with no alternatives and no negotiating power. Second, resource wealth without domestic value creation leads to economic stagnation. Canada has everything: oil, gas, minerals, timber, agricultural land, fresh water. It should be an economic powerhouse. But 14% of GDP from extractive industries means Canada exports raw materials and imports finished goods. The value added happens elsewhere. The jobs, technology, innovation all occur in other countries. Meanwhile, productivity in Canada has fallen. Investment in research and development lags. Companies hoard cash instead of building capacity. High taxes and regulation drive business away. The result is that even resource-rich Canada sees capital flight exceeding $1 trillion since 2015. Wealth flows out faster than it's created. The warning here is that resources alone don't guarantee prosperity. What matters is what you do with them. Countries that add value domestically, invest in innovation, and create competitive industries thrive. Those that just dig up resources and ship them away remain vulnerable to price swings and external shocks. Third, policy mistakes compound over time and become nearly impossible to reverse. Trudeau's government made a series of decisions that seemed reasonable in isolation, but together created a crisis: mass immigration without housing supply, carbon taxes without alternatives, high corporate taxes without productivity gains, generous social programs without fiscal discipline. Each decision had a rationale, but the cumulative effect was economic dysfunction. Housing became unaffordable, productivity collapsed, business fled, living standards fell. And now, reversing course is extraordinarily difficult. You can't quickly build millions of homes. You can't instantly retrain a workforce. You can't rebuild trust with investors who already left. Policy errors create path dependence. Once you go down a certain road, turning back requires years of painful adjustment. Here's the warning. Canada's crisis is a preview of what happens when a country takes prosperity for granted. For decades, Canada coasted on resource wealth, geographic luck, and preferential access to the world's largest market. But it stopped investing in competitiveness. It stopped building infrastructure. It stopped fostering innovation. It assumed the good times would continue forever. They didn't. Now, Canada faces a choice: accept subordinate status and deeper integration with the United States, essentially giving up sovereignty in exchange for economic stability, or attempt a painful restructuring, cut taxes, slash regulation, invest in infrastructure, diversify trade, rebuild productivity. That path requires political will that doesn't currently exist. Trudeau resigned. The government is in disarray. The opposition promises change but inherits a mess. The broader lesson applies beyond Canada. Economic security requires constant reinvestment. Countries can't rest on past success. Resource wealth, trade agreements, alliances, these things don't guarantee prosperity. They create opportunity, but only if governments make smart decisions, invest in the future, and maintain competitiveness. Canada forgot that. And now it's paying the price. Whether Canada stabilizes or spirals further depends on choices made in the next few years. The new government will have to negotiate with Donald Trump, address housing, fix productivity, and restore business confidence. None of this is easy. Some of it may be impossible. But one thing is certain: the Canada of 2015, confident, prosperous, envied, is gone. What replaces it is still being decided. Thanks for watching till the end. If you're here, you're one of those who want to understand how the financial system really works. Subscribe, new research tomorrow. And drop a comment. What do you think about this? Your perspective matters.